Good evening and welcome to Make Health Your Habit podcast live. Absolutely a pleasure to see you guys here today. It's another great episode. Loving the feedback that we're getting from the show. Today we're going to deal with a more of a serious subject than we did. I really want to say thank you to the guests I had last week, Shirley Morrison and Janet Harris, for a great show. But this week we're dealing with a very, very serious issue, an issue that's affecting so many people. And, I like to start with the show with something called In the News. And, there has been a few things in the news, but on Saturday it was actually World Mental Health Day. It was, there was so much information and news about mental health. So this show's quite apt, really, that we're dealing with the issue of mental health and depression. I've got two great guests with me today. But before I bring these guests on, I want to share something with you, something that many of my friends don't even know, because this is how pertinent this show is to me. The issue of mental health and depression is something that affected me about 12 years ago. I was actually diagnosed with depression. Now I know there's going to be some people watching this who's going to be very surprised, because there were some people very, very close to me who had no idea that I was suffering from depression, and it was for a few years. So this subject is incredibly personal to me, and the story that Patrick is going to share with you will possibly be similar to mine. I'm not necessarily going to share my story today, but I just want to let you know that I have my own personal journey of depression and recovery. And for anybody watching this who's suffered from depression, there is a way out. There is a way for you to be able to manage your feelings and get help. And this is what today's show is about. It's going to be real. We're just going to be very, very real with you guys. And hopefully, it will be of some support to the many people possibly who have suffered from depression, anxiety, low moods during this COVID period. This COVID period has caused depression and anxiety to rear its head in such a way. The government's even given extra funding to mind the isolation that people have gone through in lockdown, the financial issues that people have had to go through. I mean, 1 in 4 people will suffer from mental health issues in the UK on a normal time. What the figures are now, only time will tell. And the irony of this is, I truly believe the mental health issues that people are suffering from will only rear its head next year and possibly the year after. So if you are in a place, for whatever reason, where you feel that depression, anxiety, and these things may be an issue you're dealing with, then this show, I hope, will give you some inspiration and some answers. And I have two great guests on me. One of the guests I have known for a while. I'd done some work with him many years ago. And I, too, didn't know his story, which he is going to share with you today. So without any further ado, let me just introduce to you Patrick Powers. Good evening, Patrick. Can you hear us, Patrick?
Good evening. How's it going?
Good evening, Patrick. Well, it's a pleasure that you are joining us today. And, I really want to thank you for coming on and being prepared to share your story. What I did say is that we worked together in one of my AIM. Was it the I Factor or was it an AIM evening? I can't remember which one it was, but I know you've done a great
I think it was
presentation.
both.
Oh, it's both, yeah. Stood for aspirational, inspiration, and motivational. I used to hold those evenings many years ago, and the IFACT evening for the book that I wrote. So Patrick came along, was a guest there, was fantastic there. And at that time, I didn't have any idea about um, your story. So Patrick, before you tell us a little bit about your story, please just give us an idea of who you are and where you are now, please.
Sure. So I live in Surrey, Weybridge. Oh, am I still here?
Yeah, you're there, Patrick. Don't worry,
Zoom.
you're good.
Right. Okay, there we go. So I live in Surrey, Weybridge right now, just outside of London. And I'm originally from Denmark. I'm a marketing consultant. I do copywriting projects. So basically I write ads, teach small business owners how to pitch, how to use words to attract more customers. And I built a very, very successful business at some point in the network marketing field. I retired in the Caribbean. Everything was just beautiful. And then I decided that it was too boring for me, and I sold that business, and everything just went bad after that. I mean, it was just horrible. And ended up in this beautiful waterfront property in Dominican Republic in the Caribbean, and just completely running out of money. Only with the help of a friend, I got the money to come back to the UK, where I had a few contacts to restart my business, and that was in 2009. And having gone from just living the life, just traveling, never worrying about money, and being highly respected and loved, like everywhere I came in the world, people wouldn't even allow me to pay for my own food. Like everybody wanted me to stay at their places, so it was just a wonderful life. And then suddenly I was struggling, and all that struggle, it got to my health, and I started getting very, very sick. And then in the beginning, I thought, I had been in the health and supplementation field, so I started to look into what I could do in terms of supplements and what might be wrong with me, and look into the physical, or the physical and the nutritional side of it. And I just became more and more and more and more sick, to the point that I couldn't eat anything practically without getting even more sick. I had brain fog, I had headaches, I had tiredness, muscle fatigue, and then I started to develop anxiety, because I was just worried about my health, like, so what's happening with my health here. And then I became even more worried about my finances, because I could hardly work. Sometimes I could only work 20 minutes at a time, and then I had to nap for 2 hours, and sometimes for the rest of the day. So it was a very, very stressful period of my life, and I was constantly worried about ending up on the street. So all this stress had just completely broken down my immune system and my hormonal system, and it ended up getting severe anxiety, which turned into something worse, which is very akin to PTSD, where you just get trapped in this pattern that is so hard to get out of. And about a year ago, I was actually kind of calculating how many anxiety attacks I was having, and it's approximately an anxiety attack, a small one, every 8 seconds, which accounts for about 8,000 a day. So just to give you an idea about how bad it was. But a couple of years ago, I attended a training in Canada to reverse this pattern, and it has started to work quite well. About a year ago and a half a year ago, it really started to speed up. In the last couple of months, I'm almost recovered now.
So, so
So
Patrick,
Ken, are you still there? Yeah.
yeah, I'm here. Don't worry. I was just letting you do your thing because obviously, as someone who suffered from depression, I know that when you're talking about that subject, it's a subject that can really, really touch you and really, really bring back some emotions. Tell me, when you first realized that you was at this low point, did you recognize what you were feeling? Did you recognize it? Or was it just that you just thought you was feeling low, or did you actually recognize that you was actually going down a deep hole?
Well, I mean, I was sort of recognizing, but I was focusing mostly on the fact that, or what I thought was the fact that my body was sick, right? That was the in my world at that point. that was the reason for all my problems. My body was sick, therefore I can't work. Therefore, I have financial trouble because I can't work. Right? I wasn't thinking the other way around. Is like, my thinking is in trouble. I need to change my thinking and then heal my body. Right. So it was kind of a weird thing that happened that actually made me aware of it. It's a longer story, but it was kind of a spiritual experience that suddenly got me to realize that it may actually be
Mm.
emotional stress, all of this thing. And from that moment, I started to slowly recover. But man, it was a slow, slow, slow recovery. We're talking about it's not more than about 3.5 years ago that I was practically suicidal every day. I had suicidal
Mm.
thoughts
Mm.
because it was just, think of this, just constantly, constantly afraid
Mm.
and depressed at that point as well.
Mm.
The depression went quite a lot quicker than the anxiety, by the way. The depression was relatively easy for me to overcome, whereas the anxiety has been like, wow, it's been the toughest project of my life. But thankfully, I'm like 98% through it now. So now I'm like, I just know it's just going to be now actually just a matter of weeks or a couple of months, and it's going to be completely 100% cured because I know the techniques that I'm using is working, right? And it's continually improving every single day, if not,
Mm.
yeah, every single week, if not every single day. So I didn't really recognize it too much. I was focused on the physical, what was happening in my body.
What would you say was the lowest point of that period that you can recognize, either physically or mentally?
Well, I was so intolerant to all foods, and it's 8 months. For 8 months, I was not able to eat anything else but carrots and meat.
Mm.
Basically, my carrots and meat was like 98% of my food for 8 months. Imagine that. And I couldn't even have any spices, so I couldn't vary the carrots and the meat. It was just like plain carrots and meat every single day. It was just horrible, absolutely insane. I woke up every morning with dread of the day, dread of my life. Thought I'm gonna die. I'm gonna die alone. My health is just breaking down. I'm just gonna die miserable. That was basically my thoughts throughout the whole day. I'm laughing at it now because it sounds a little bit crazy, but I
I,
mean, it's just horrible.
I
Yeah.
can, and your emotions, because when I was suffering, there was at times a range of emotions that just came out of nowhere. There, is that what happened to you as well? In the sense that I know some people that sometimes they're very angry, or then they can be very tearful. Did you go through those range of emotions yourself?
Not so much. Um, it was it was just dread and just generalized fear and anxiety throughout the day. That was most of my emotion, and just kicking myself. I was really badly um, berating myself for selling my first business because I had in
Mm.
my mind, the perfect life. Right. So how could I be so stupid that I sold that business because everything was perfect? I had a beautiful girlfriend in New York. I was traveling the world, lived in the Caribbean, lived in Spain, never had a worry in my life. Like, how could I be so stupid? So I was berating myself a lot. And that, added to it, like that almost self-loathing, self-hate of my former choices. Um, and that was a long journey actually for me to start changing that pattern of stopping my self blame and just accept life as it was at that point, and start to train myself to be happy. And it's not just something I just did from one moment to the other. So, just be happy, just be grateful every single day. At that point, these patterns of thinking was so ingrained into my brain. My limbic brain has completely taken over, and it was not just a matter of like, hey, just think positively. It was way, way, way too powerful patterns that took a lot of discipline to reprogram.
So tell me, as a man, because I think it's great that you're on the show as a man sharing this. did you feel that the depression impacted on your masculinity? Did you think it made you less of a man?
No, not really.
Okay.
I've never really had so big problems in sharing that I
Mm.
had problems. There was never a massive problem for me, so to speak, because everybody has problems.
Yes, that's right.
Um, I was very frustrated with myself, but
Hmm.
it was not so much in my masculinity. It was more, I would say, my self-image as being an intelligent person. I saw myself as being quite intelligent and rational, and the fact that I couldn't control my brain, that I had these thoughts that I just couldn't control. There was like irrational fear of everything. I mean, again, every 8 seconds, imagine, like, there was just there's no point in these, right? I was like, why am I so afraid all the time? Like, I'm flossing my teeth, I'm getting afraid. I'm putting water on the kettle, I'm getting afraid. It's completely nonsensical. That was kind of the problem with my own self-image in
Mm.
thinking as myself as an intelligent person,
Yes.
suddenly not being able to control my brain.
I appreciate your openness and honesty, Patrick. So tell me, did you speak to anybody? Did when you started to realize that you had these feelings and you was going on this low, did you reach out to anybody? And if you did,
Sure, I
if you could
no,
share
absolutely.
who
I
that
had I had
person
some
was.
friends. Yeah, no, no, I had a couple of friends that I was talking, especially one. But you know, first of all, anxiety is really not something that I think it's very, very, very hard, if not impossible, for people to relate to if they haven't experienced it, right?
Mm.
And especially the kind of had where it was like a PTSD where the brain just gets stuck in this pattern, because it's so irrational, and it's so hard for people to relate to it. And the other thing is that even though I don't really have any trouble sharing about problems and asking for help and all that kind of stuff, I also realized that, look, if I'm going to sit and moan about my problems all the time, I'm going to lose my friends. I'm going to at least try
Mm.
to a certain extent, to try to be positive around them as much as I can. So
Just
I
for
didn't, I didn't constantly sit and share about my problems.
just for the benefit of the people listening, um, PS post traumatic stress disorder is something that is normally associated with people who are in the army, people who have gone through a really really horrific experience, and that's deeper than depression. So just for the benefits of the audience, I thought because to clear that up so people don't understand
Yeah,
what
and
that
it's
is.
very complicated, actually. But explained simply, it's the limbic brain,
Mm.
which is the fight and flight brain,
Mm.
that because of, and it could be of several reasons. It could actually be because you've been exposed to chemicals. It could be
Mm.
because you've been in a traffic accident or had other types of physical
Mm.
stress. Like, traffic accident is
Mm.
a physical type of physical stress. And especially if that's combined with emotional stress, then the limbic brain, which is responsible for fight and flight, can basically come to the conclusion, so to speak, that the world is so dangerous that I better be aware all the time. I
Mm.
better, like, raise my awareness level because apparently the world
Absolutely.
is so dangerous. And when that happens, it basically starts producing stress
Mm.
hormones all the time,
That's
and that
right.
starts to break down the body, the immune system, the digestive
Yeah.
system.
Hmm.
And that now is almost like the brain saying, like, see, I told you it's really, really dangerous. And it starts to become a
Mm.
heightened awareness about all these dangerous bodily symptoms. Like, if you have a pain in your knee, the brain will start to notice that constantly.
How
So,
was
and then everything just exacerbates it.
how was your sleep, Patrick, during this time?
Um, I was constantly tired.
Mm.
So when I fell asleep at night, by the way, I was always afraid going to sleep at night.
Hmm.
I thought I was going to die
Hmm.
in my sleep. When I slept, I actually slept fairly well, but like not long enough, like not nearly long enough. Typically, I woke up around 4:30 in the morning, and just dread and fear.
because when you're suffering from the depression, it does affect your sleep. And when you don't sleep, what happens?
Sure.
Your body can move into a state called continuous sympathetic nervous activation. And that is where your body's in a heightened sense of awareness, which again induces the stress hormone cortisol, which again exacerbates the way
Yep.
you're feeling and the anxiety. So this is why I asked about your sleep when it comes to depression. How did you first start to seek help from your state? What's the first thing you
Well,
do when you want to seek help?
so I'd read somewhere that IBS, which I had all kinds of digestive problems, including all the intolerances. So I'd read somewhere that IBS could be cured in 70% of the cases with hypnosis. And so I started going to some hypnosis sessions, which were good. Um, didn't really do amazing things, but I started doing meditation, and that improved a little bit. I started doing yoga, which was amazing. And basically started getting into all the emotional and spiritual sides of my symptoms. And that's what led me ultimately to a retraining, brain reprogramming technique I went to Canada for. And that was the one thing that really turned things around for me. Also, if people are suffering from
Hmm.
anxiety, I would highly recommend a book, an audiobook called Dare, Dare.
Okay.
Um, it's just amazing. I mean, it's literally it's incredible.
Have to. What I'm going to do now, I'm going to turn the comments on because I know that I've just got a couple of comments because people are on YouTube, LinkedIn, and Facebook, and they may want
Yeah,
to comment. So I don't really want to didn't want to distract you too much. But if people feel
sure.
during the show they want to make a comment, please feel free to make a comment, and it should come up here. So you took that journey to be able to on recovery. Uh, Now, from what I am aware, depression is not something you ever really recover from. It's something you learn to manage. So
Really?
from your low state, how long would you say it took you for you got to a place where you was in control of your depressive state?
Well, okay, I might be an anomaly if that's the case because
Okay.
I'm completely recovered and I
Okay.
don't think I'll ever have depression ever in my life again.
Yeah. Yeah.
I simply don't see it as a possibility.
Yeah.
Uh, in terms of anxiety, maybe I'll be anxious, but you know,
Hmm.
I mean, the depression, I don't know how long it took me. It was relatively quickly, let's say 6 months, 6 months to a
Okay.
year. And what I know about depression now is basically, and Tony Robbins says the same thing. Not that he knows everything, but I found this to be true. The depression is basically, I mean, it can also be affected by your diet. By the way, greatly
Yes.
affected because
Absolutely.
if your
We're
diet
gonna
is
be
toxic,
talking
if
about
your
that
body is
later.
toxic, yeah,
Absolutely.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Um, but basically, there's something you want, and you believe that it's not possible for you to get it.
Hmm. Hmm.
That's basically the thinking pattern behind depression, right? So there's something you want which you believe you can't get.
Okay. Well, that the question.
So for me, it was that I lost my business. I had an amazing life. I had an
Hmm.
amazing business, and now I completely fucked it up.
Hmm.
And at that point, I believed I'm never going to get that life back. That's
Okay.
gone, and I'm going to struggle forever. And now I'm sick, so I'm going to die alone without a girlfriend and all that kind of stuff. That was literally the pattern, and I had to force myself to start thinking, no, 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 this is going to change. I
Mm.
will get my business back, my life back. I will get my health back. So I started to believe that and took action towards
Great.
that. And that pretty much, like, very, very quickly solved my depression.
Okay. Well, I mean, we have the expert Shireen on afterwards, and I will pose that question to her whether or not depression is ever cured or just managed. And again, I know the issue of um, of depression is quite emotive, so I do apologise for the profanity. I understand you're just really expressing yourself. I think someone's asking about the link for Dare, so you could possibly talk about that a little bit later on.
Yep.
Uh, you see, for me, um, the issue of depression then, similar to you, left anxiety. So you still had a mental health issue, really, because anxiety is a mental health issue. So even though your depression has been, as you would say it, managed, and again we'll speak to Shireen afterwards about the difference between depression and anxiety, you still had anxiety. So would you say your anxiety is also completely cleared, or at this moment you're just learning to manage your anxiety?
Hopefully, I'm not learning to manage it. I would say I'm 98% over it. And the techniques that I'm using, I don't see it as management. It's simply rewiring the brain. The brain has been in a pattern where it was just thinking very, very, basically danger thoughts all the time. And now I'm retraining my brain to realize there is no danger. And basically every single time I get into a negative thought pattern that triggers the anxiety, I'm retraining my brain to go into a positive emotional state. Right. Um, so the moment that I have an anxious thought, I become aware of it, and I've retrained this pattern where I actually go into a heightened emotional state. Because the reality is that we have control, at least consciously, we have control over our thoughts and emotions right now. Like anybody can think back to an amazing experience in their life right now, or imagine an imaginary amazing experience in the future, and feel what would that feel like in the body. And that's basically what I've been doing thousands and thousands, well, tens of thousands of times, if not hundreds of thousands now the last couple of years, retraining my brain to every single time I have an anxious thought, I go into an positive emotional state, basically. And therefore, training my brain that every single time I have a negative emotion, boom, it just shifts to a positive emotion right away. And then at some point, the brain just relaxes and says, okay, everything's cool.
So just to be
And
clear,
now, especially literally in the last couple of weeks, I have now been able to start clearing my food intolerances. I eat a lot more things that I couldn't before. So I'm literally retraining my brain to accept these foods, which caused tremendous trouble before.
so just to be clear, in your mind, your depression has been cured, but you now suffer from anxiety. Here's the question: would you say the anxiety is a residual from the depression, or are they two separate
I think
occurrences?
they're two separate things, but they can happen often. One as a side product of the other one. But they're basically two different things.
So possibly your depression might have made you more susceptible to anxiety.
It's possible. Yeah, it's possible.
Yeah, yeah.
I think it was the other way around. I think that the anxiety came first, and then because then suddenly I have this, I'm sick, I'm not making any money, then I become depressed about that situation, right? And I'm suddenly starting to believe I'm never going to get proper life.
You know,
So I think it
again,
was the anxiety that came first, and then depression afterwards.
I really appreciate you being open with us about the
You're welcome.
way and experience you've been through. Now, I know you lost a lot of weight, Patrick. How much weight did you actually lose?
11 stone,
11 stone. Wow. Now,
160 pounds.
I saw that. Did that have anything to do with the depression or anxiety, or was that just a way of you managing your life holistically?
No, I was just there was even further back than that,
Hmm.
that I was just, I've been overweight my whole life. Very, very overweight. And I just reached a point where I said, this is not acceptable anymore. I have to change it. I became afraid actually of developing diabetes and other effects of being overweight. No, I never really had it, but I became afraid of it. And therefore I said, okay, this has to change. And so I did.
Yeah.
So over about, uh, I don't know, 18 months to 2 years, I lost 160 pounds.
Did you seek therapy, did you have any professional therapy to help with your anxiety or depression, or was it all self-managed?
I did seek a little bit of therapy, and to be honest, it was completely worthless. So I quickly dropped out of that. There was no effect whatsoever. So yeah, that was not a great experience for me.
Was it CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, that you sought?
I can't remember. I tried a different couple of things, well, including the hypnosis therapy, which
Hmm.
I wouldn't say it was completely worthless, but it didn't really have much effect.
Was that? Would you say that's down to the therapy? Because when we spoke, you said you had some horror stories. Was that down to the therapy, the therapist, or would you say that was you? Because for therapy to work, you have to be open to the therapy. You have to be open to the fact that this therapy
Yeah,
can
I
help
think it
me.
was it was it was not the therapist. The hypnotist I was
Mm,
going with was actually, she was both very caring and very professional.
hmm.
It was just, I think that my problem was such a unique one, or it's not that well known, this thing with PTSD, and where your brain also starts to create food intolerances and all these things.
Mm,
I mean, there was so many problems, right? So it's a mental, it was a spiritual problem. For I was just not feeling the right place in my life. Fear of being alone, and fear of failing, and then the food, no energy, fear of my financial future. Like, there were so many things that was just intertwined. And I think that very, very few people are aware of these things, this kind of pattern. There's, as far as I know, there's only three methods in the world which deals with this thing
mm,
with limbic brain impairment. One is called DNRS, and that's the one I was going to in Canada. There's another one here in London called the Gupta method. Also
hmm.
went to that, also quite good. And then there's one in Australia called the ANZ rewiring system or something like that. I can't remember. But very, very few people knew really what was going on in my life. So I don't necessarily blame them, because it's just like, how can they know something that is so relatively new?
Yeah, I believe therapy is an excellent way to deal with certain mental conditions. Unfortunately, it didn't necessarily work for you, but I truly believe in it. This is why I've studied CBT and how the mind works, because I believe sometimes, we try to deal with issues ourselves, and we're dealing it where, it's that old saying is, how can you change your life situation from the same perspective that caused it? And sometimes therapy allows you to step outside of that situation and then
Sure.
look in on your situation. But it didn't work for you. But again, we can speak with Shireen a little bit later on
Yeah.
about therapy. So where?
Because
So tell.
because basically, like, my specific situation is not like a cognitive thing that I have
Hmm.
to accept stuff that happened early in my life.
Hmm.
It literally is brain damage. That's how the experts explain it. It literally is just,
Okay.
it's brain damage, and it requires more than just cognitive. It's more akin to energy psychology, like tapping, for example. Not that it's like tapping, but just to give people some kind of reference from the techniques that I was using.
So can I ask you a question, and you can answer it as how you will if you want to. And this is a question as a man, and as a masculine, as an achiever. Would you say that your the perception? I'm going to use the word ego. Um, might have got in the way of seeking therapy, because the problem that I found, even in my coaching, is sometimes when a man goes to somebody, it's an admission that they need help, and a lot of men don't want to admit that they need help. um, is that something that, if you was to do some
Never,
introspection quickly, never? Okay, great. It's just a
never.
question because I know it happens.
Yeah, I think that's stupid. I mean, that's stupid.
Yeah.
Like, why
It,
would you?
well, it does.
It's
It
just,
actually it does happen. People's egos
I
do
know,
get in the
yeah.
way. when it comes to seeking
Yeah,
therapy, because you sit on a counselor's a bench. You are now saying to that therapist, that counselor, to the world, that I need help. And often men
sure.
don't want to admit that they need help. So this is
Yeah.
why I asked you that question.
I never understood that kind of mindset.
Hmm.
It puzzles me. It really does. It
Okay.
seriously puzzles me
Okay. I understand.
because it's
So
like if you need help, then why would you rather suffer like for the rest of your life?
absolutely.
Like
And, and,
it doesn't
and
make
this
any
is
sense.
and this is a discussion here to so people can understand. Look, if you need help, depression is not a weakness; it's an illness. So if you're suffering from depression,
Sure.
it doesn't mean you're weak. You're not less of a man or less of a woman. You have an illness that can be treated. But when you see it as a weakness, you close up. You don't let anybody know. And I went through that period myself until I opened up. And the best thing for me during my period was open up, because it's quite cathartic um, when you speak with somebody about the way you're feeling. So Patrick, we've heard your story. We're going to come back and talk to you a little bit later. But where are you now? Tell us, where are you now on that journey to this point here when it comes to your anxiety, depression, and manage it? Can you summarize where are you now? And you're obviously at a high point. I watch you on LinkedIn. You're doing some great things on LinkedIn. So where are you now? Because you've come from that low to where are you now, Patrick?
Life is just amazing right now. I mean, I haven't had
Hmm.
depression for I don't know, 2 years at least.
Hmm. Hmm.
And the anxiety has in the last 6 months
Hmm.
improved so greatly, and especially in the last couple of months, it was
Hmm.
like it's weekly improvements, and now it's daily improvements. Where it's
Wonderful.
down to, I'm not really thinking about it too much actually.
Hmm.
Um, it is just working so well for me, the techniques that I'm using, that it's like I'm not worried about if I'm ever going to get completely well, because I just know 100% sure I'm going to get completely well. For me now, it's a done deal, and that also gives me extra feeling of security that, hey, yeah,
Hmm.
okay, I'm a little bit, maybe a little bit edgy from time to time, but it's no problem. In a couple of weeks, a couple of months, I'm going to be completely cured.
Absolutely fantastic.
So I'm super psyched about life.
That's
I'm
great.
super psyched about business now for the first time in many years.
Hmm.
Have a more positive outlook that I had for at least the last 10 years.
Yeah. Well, again, really appreciate you being open and sharing your story. I'm going to put you back in the green room in a moment, and I'm going to bring Shireen on, and we're going to have a perspective from a professional talking about it. Then I'm going to bring you back at the end, because I know there were some parting comments that you would. So I'm just going to put you in the green room there, Patrick, and I will be back with you very soon. I really appreciate you sharing your story. That was a real
You're welcome.
wonderful story there from Patrick. I am now going to bring in someone here to share their expertise with us. She would have heard Patrick's story, Patrick's not so great journey when it came to therapy, but she will have her own thoughts. If you care to uh, point out a question or leave a question on any of the platforms, they'll come up and we'll see if we can um, get Shireen to answer that. But for the moment, let me introduce you to Shireen Barrows. And in fact, let Shireen introduce herself. So Shireen, please just tell us about who you are and a little bit about your story, please.
Hello, I am.
Let me put you on. Let me put you on your hint. There you go, Shireen. There you go. Okay.
Hello, my name is Shireen, and I work as a senior pod practitioner for the NHS, and I also work for Mind, the charity. And basically, most of my clients come in with either anxiety or depression, and that is usually the basis at which we start. So I'm looking forward to manage that. I think one of the I actually wanted to check in with you, Ken, to see if you were okay, because I noticed that obviously one of the things we need to realize is everybody's experience of anxiety and depression is different. And I think probably we could have a conversation around that. What I will say as well is based on research, when Black men suffer with anxiety or depression or any other mental health condition, they do find it hard to seek support. The stats shows that they're in crisis a lot more, and that is the point at which they may seek help.
Well, I appreciate you want to check in with me. I mean, I think today is a day about being open. I mean, Patrick was very generous with us in being open, and I think it would be remiss of me to deal with this subject today to not talk about my journey. And to some extent, the platform is Patrick's and yours, but I just really wanted to share that the experience of going through depression, experience of anxiety, the experience of not wanting to get out of bed, the experience of having emotions where you become tearful, even at times, you have these, one or two, you may call suicidal thoughts. They just come out of nowhere, and the feeling of it being emasculating. You feel less of a man. This shouldn't happen to me. I'm such a strong man. I'm someone who's always leading at the front, but look at me. I'm feeling like a wreck. So, and I felt that it's important that I share my story as well, because there is a way out. There is wherever anyone is, just like Patrick has shown today, wherever anyone is in their journey, it doesn't have to stay there. That is not the story. That is just part of the story. And part of the efforts of this show is to say to people, look, no matter how you're feeling, you can get help. So here's the question I'd like to ask. The question I asked Patrick, and I've read and I've come to understand, and possibly I'm wrong, that depression is not something that's ever totally cured. It's something that you manage, you learn to manage and keep it under control. What would your thoughts be on that?
I think it's very individual. I think definitely there are techniques that can be given to manage it. It also depends on the type of depression you have, because there are five major types of depression. One is disruptive mood disorder, and that is to do with basically it makes you feel angry. It makes you, you have a temper even when you're not supposed to. You feel irritable. Then there are other major depressive disorders, which is a bit more long term, and that's when the suicidal thoughts come in.
Okay.
That's when you feel you forget things. You feel as though you are isolated and alone. And then there's and what comes under that as well is SADS, which is seasonal affective disorder, which affects a large proportion of Black individuals during the winter months. And later I will talk about ways in which to handle that as well. Also, you've got perinatal dysphoric disorder, which is another form of depressive disorder that affects women at a certain time of the month, but not all women. I mean, obviously, you have the general feeling of low moods, etc. But this particular group of women, it affects their joints, their sleep. They find it hard to go to work, go to school, and it definitely affects their relationships. And then you have like a substance or medically induced depression as well. So it's based on taking other substances as well as some sort of medication. So it varies according to the type of depression that you have, would be my answer to it.
So it seems like depression is an incredibly varied and complex issue. What now? First of all, could you just, because we've had the COVID period, we've had the isolation. there's been so many people who have been locked up, and as we know already, the issue of mental health has reared its head. Mind has got some extra funding. It was Mental Health Day on Saturday, and there was lots of talk about mental health. And there are people out there who have low days. They just have a low day or a low couple of days. What is the difference between someone recognizing that just having a low period than them beginning to start suffering from depression? What would you say the signs that they would have to look out for, or an individual looking at a family member would have to look out for?
Okay, well, obviously you feel sad at times. We all do. Nobody feels 100% of the time. So what I would say is, if you feel a persistent sadness for 2 weeks consistently, usually after a few days, we'll say, okay, fine, I need to do A, B, C, D. But after 2 weeks, if you're still feeling this persistent sadness, then I would advise you to go to your GP at that point. Yeah. Now there are certain types of depression, such as the persistent depressive disorder, which if you're suffering from depression up to 2 years, then you'd be diagnosed with that. The issue is, it is not just a feeling of sadness, it's almost a feeling of hopelessness. It's almost a feeling that nothing is going to change. And sometimes we avoid dealing with stuff because it is easier to deal with than actually saying, okay, I'm going to seek help. Another issue is, it depends on the support network you have. If you feel embarrassed, or if you feel as though, you don't have a support network, or just as you expressed, feeling less of a man, or your ego is at play and you're thinking, I don't want to be a burden on someone, then obviously this will affect you a lot more.
Okay, so that's fantastic. That, I think, that definitely brings some clarity there. The difference between anxiety and depression. So I think you've given us what is the difference between anxiety and depression?
Okay, what I can say is that there is some overlap in sleep. So you either sleep too much or sleep too little. Some overlap in terms of appetite changes. When you're anxious, sometimes you have low appetite, sometimes you can't eat. So there's some overlap in terms of that. But the difference is, for example, there are 5 major types of anxiety. OCD is one of them. And OCD is usually almost like a germ compulsion, where you feel you will catch germs if you touch certain surfaces, or you have to introduce repetitive behaviors. So you think, I need to switch off the cooker, and you have to do a routine in order to ensure that you've switched off the cooker. So that's just the basics of OCD. Obviously, there are more depth to it. So then you think about generalized anxiety, and that is to do with obsessive worrying. That is very different to just worrying normally, because we all worry at times. But if it becomes an obsession, and if it becomes something that stops you from kind of living your life, then obviously that is generalized anxiety. And then another thing that your guest spoke about was the panic disorder. So that comes with panic attacks. Usually with panic attacks, the thought of having one actually creates more panic. And then there's PTSD, which he also mentioned, which is post-traumatic stress disorder. Yes, it is true that soldiers at war gets it, but so do people who suffer from major traumas. It could be childhood traumas. It could be a reoccurring nightmare due to a difficult experience that you've had. And in his case, he lost his business. So for him, that was traumatic for him. And so that is why he was suffering with PTSD.
So depression, you're feeling incredibly low and hopeless for a 2-week period, that's when you really need to start looking at, possibly seeking some help. And I'm guessing you would say it's better to seek help earlier than later in the process. Was that correct? Yes.
Absolutely. Talk to a friend if necessary.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because one of the issues as well that creates isolation with anxiety and depression, for example, is because you don't want to be a burden and because you're overthinking it. You're thinking,
Hmm.
I don't want to be a burden on anyone. This is something I can deal with. So it prevents you from actually asking for support, asking for help, even having a talk with someone. Yeah. Or go to your GP.
Yeah. Now, so the COVID period, we had the lockdown, and we had the lockdown where people weren't allowed to leave their homes, and research is slowly coming out to say that anxiety, and if we deal with the anxiety, because I think that might have been the bigger manifestation from the lockdown. This concern about catching coronavirus, this concern about being isolated in your home. To anybody watching who may have recognized some symptoms, that they've been feeling a little bit isolated, feeling that there are emotions and thoughts that they're having that they never used to have before the lockdown, what would you say to those individuals?
What I would say is just remember that anxiety is normal. Everybody has anxiety at some point in their life. The only two major groups, as far as I know, with no anxiety are people who's dead and people with sociopathic tendencies. Yeah. So anxiety is actually quite normal. What I would say is that it becomes abnormal, obviously, when it starts affecting your life generally. So it may mean you're ruminating over thoughts. So you mentioned the thoughts of catching COVID. There are things that you need to do to actually lessen those thoughts. So, for example, if you're watching the news every day, it will only encourage the anxiety. It is best to either watch the news once a week if necessary, or do something else other than watching the news, because that in itself will actually stimulate anxious feelings. I think another thing is get into a structure. If you structure yourself in terms of finding other things to occupy the time, then that would be helpful. I think another thing is when you're feeling anxious, is another tip is probably to start a worry jar. So if you make a decision, if for example you have anxiety quite a lot during the day, if you say, okay, I'm going to determine that between the hours of 6 and 7, I'm going to worry. And everything I'm worried about, I will write them down and put them in a jar. That is another way to actually deal with your anxiety so that you keep it within a certain, kind of hours rather than having to worry about it every day. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
I think that's the thing about the news. It's something that can easily make you even more anxious because the news doesn't care about anybody who's suffering from anxiety. The news is the news. It's just glorified news, and the tabloids can easily make someone even more anxious. I think that's a great tip to telling people to reduce their exposure to the news around the coronavirus. I know we had a discussion prior to this about food, and Patrick mentioned food, and and one of the reasons why I hold this podcast is helping make people make health their habit, and the Lean Mind Body method focuses on nutrition. That has also helped me and a few people that I've worked with. So for those people who don't understand the link between food and anxiety or depression, could you just give them a brief overview of how the foods they eat can trigger a depressive episode?
Okay. For example, or not eat, as the case may be. Basically, there are four major happy hormones. There's dopamine, there's serotonin, oxytocin, and endorphins that the body releases. In terms of dopamine, that is more of a feel good hormone. So it deals with pleasure, it deals with learning. People with Parkinson's, they feel that your body is low in dopamine levels because it affects your motor neuron side of the brain, for example. So, in order to help with increasing dopamine levels, um, you can eat foods like yogurt, beans, pineapple, nuts. Those things have dopamine in them, and that will help to actually put some dopamine back into your body. The next one is serotonin. Serotonin deals more with, it regulates your mood. So it deals more with your sleep, your appetite, your memory. And so when that is low in your body, that in itself can cause you to feel low. So once again, lean red meat, eggs, I can actually put something in on the site to help people to understand which food groups are very good for that. And then you have oxytocin, which is the love hormone. So you can increase those by kissing, cuddling, stroking your pet. Um, Basically, it deals with childbirth, people who are breastfeeding. So though oxytocin is produced in the body due to during those times. And general endorphins, obviously they're natural pain relievers in the body. I noticed that your guest also spoke about an overproduction of stress hormones that was happening. So when it's a situation that you become heavily stressed, then the body overproduce certain hormones within the body. Um, and so it affects how you feel. It has an impact in your moods.
Yeah, I think that's so important. I mean, I pay dopamine is obviously a hormone that plays a massive part, but I really have a big focus on serotonin because serotonin, it's mostly produced in the gut. That's where most of people's serotonin is produced, and the food you eat affects that production of serotonin. And I just want to touch on this briefly. And it's the way I eat is a low carb. That's sugar reduction. So I eat food with very, very low sugar. So I don't get the blood spike. And what happens, the issue when you have a blood spike, you have high energy and then it drops back down. And how does that, when someone has a high spike, they feel lots of energy, and then they obviously the blood level drops right back down, the blood sugar level drops right back down. Does that? I'm sure that must have an effect on people's moods and obviously possibly a depressive episode.
Yeah, it does. In effect, serotonin, your serotonin levels, having anxiety and depression, they usually say that there is a link to your serotonin levels. So if it's a situation where you need to, sorry, could you just repeat the question you just asked me? Go
So
ahead.
it was just a question of the blood sugar. So my take on it is in normal circumstances, it's very simple. It's in a simple terms. It's called the carb crashes, where you eat something with the refined carbohydrates, your blood sugar rises, and then it drops, and then you feel very, very, very tired. When you're suffering from depression, eating foods, high sugar foods, and having your blood sugar spike and then drop back down, I'm guessing that must have an exacerbating effect on any kind of anxiety or depressive episode.
Absolutely. And I would say the foods to stay away from when you have anxiety and depression is alcohol, sugary foods, deep fried foods, anything that is processed. Because, for example, sugar, you mentioned your blood sugar levels. Yes, you eat it and you feel great initially when you eat it, but then it drops and your mood drops with it. So it takes you on a high and then drops you really low. And that wouldn't be beneficial for you.
Yeah, and the irony of depression is that when you're feeling depressed, you just want to eat anything. You just grab up a food, you grab up the refined carbohydrates. So if you are feeling low, one of the worst things you can eat is a sugar laden food, because it will give you some short-term relief in the high, but then when you come back down, and I'm talking about from my experience, you will feel even worse. So one of the ways, and we're going to talk about ways that people might be able to self-manage before we go into to therapy. One of the ways I found, and that you can manage, is by managing your diet, eating foods that are not high in sugar, eating, as I eat, low carb foods. So the food situation is one way that people, and we will put that list on my site. Before we move on to a therapy, what is another way that individuals suffering from anxiety, you can choose which one, or depression, they may be able to do some self-management to reduce the symptoms of depression or anxiety?
Okay. Well, it's once again, it depends on the type that they're suffering from. But in terms of self-management, I think one of the things that work really well for both anxiety and depression is meditation. I think what happens is when we have anxiety and depression, we use a side of the brain more than the other, because we go into unhelpful thinking pattern as though this will never end, or I'm not good enough. And so what happens with meditation is that you end up using the other side of the brain that helps you to be in the moment. So the idea is that anxiety comes from thinking too much in the future, and depression comes from thinking too much about the past. So mindfulness or meditation actually helps to bring you in the moment. Yoga is another great one. That is another great way, because it balances exercise as well as meditation. So that also helps you to stay in the moment and helps you to manage that. Another thing is you could also try, for example, if you have social anxiety, being in lockdown, it's not going to help your condition. But what you can do is you can kind of do a behavioral activation, which is you can make a decision that today I'm just going to go out in the garden. And then from there, you escalate it. I'm just going to walk down the road. And kind of take it in stages so that at least you are not just trapped in the house. You're doing something about trying to help your social anxiety.
Okay, some great. We're gonna move on to some tips at the end. So tell me, I am a family member. I'm a friend, and I suspect that my partner, my family member, my friend is suffering from depression. I've seen them; they've been very, very low for a while. How well? I suppose each case is individual, but what suggestion would you give to those individuals to try to reach out to their family member, friend, spouse who they feel may be suffering from depression? What would you say to those individuals listening now?
Okay, I think just have a conversation. You don't even have to talk about depression or anxiety if you suspect it in your family member. You can simply make a decision that you're going to call them every evening at a certain time just to make sure that they're okay. So sometimes it's the simple things that actually creates the most support. Another thing is, if you are concerned about them, really concerned, then I would suggest you suggest therapy to them. I, as a therapist, obviously, I don't necessarily promote medical intervention in terms of necessarily drugs, but sometimes it's necessary. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes you just need to talk through some of the issues. And sometimes speaking through those issues with a family member may not be what you want because you feel judged by them. So sometimes you just need to speak to a professional. And then from there, you know, you can take it from there, which is to seek help through psychotherapy or counseling.
Okay, Some great advice there. And anybody watching this who has experienced that through listening to the conversation there, they may have recognized, hold on, I've been feeling very, very low for a couple of weeks, incredibly, feeling hopeless, lots of diverse range of emotions. What would you say to those individuals watching this now?
I would tell them to go to their doctor and ask their doctor to refer them to therapy. I think unless it has come to the stage where they're having suicidal thoughts, I think it is possible to discuss some of the underlying issues in therapy. I think we need to not forget as well that these things occur because there are things that are happening in our lives that we're not happy about. So it could be we don't have control over a job situation. It could be that we are feeling we don't know if we're going to be paid for the next month. So this is just an indication that there is something that needs your attention. And maybe talking through it with someone will help that.
And therapy, we're going to bring Patrick back in a moment. But your experience, obviously you're a therapist. How successful would you say therapy is? I think part of the issue is breaking down the stigma about therapy. How successful would you say therapy is in dealing with anxiety and depression?
Well, it's been recommended to use CBT for anxiety and depression, but I use more than CBT. I think CBT is great when it comes to dealing with unhelpful thinking patterns, when it comes to you reaching the stage where you're fortune telling or overgeneralizing. So, for example, if you went out yesterday and you were hit by a car, you decide, I'm not going out today because I'm going to be hit by a car again today. Now, CBT helps you to kind of try that out in a different way and think about it differently. So say, maybe if I use the pedestrian crossing today, I will be safer than I was yesterday. So it's actually challenging those negative thinking patterns. That is great in terms of helping somebody to navigate through some of the skills they may need to help their anxiety or depression. However, I feel that there are underlying issues that create anxiety and depression. So it could be things from childhood. It could be childhood trauma. It could be, similarly to Patrick, going through a difficult situation and feeling as though you've lost your livelihood. It could be a number of things, but sometimes it comes out in our body through things like depression and anxiety. But obviously, your needs, your innate needs as a human being, is not being met somehow. And those are the underlying issues that needs to be talked through, that CBT doesn't give you the capability of doing.
I think if we're touching on the issue of depression, I think we need to touch on it. Now, especially let me just say, you can only deal with so much in an hour and a half on this vast subject. But I think we need to touch on the issue of postnatal depression, because that's something that so many women suffer from, and some women don't even realize that they're suffering from postnatal depression. So, just your thoughts around postnatal depression and possibly managing that.
Well, usually postnatal depression can start from the time of pregnancy, and it could go on throughout the pregnancy and when you've had the baby. So it would be things like you could have suicidal thoughts, you could feel unworthy, not feeling good enough, not having the capability to look after your child. Sometimes it includes not bonding with your child, and then having worries around that, which cause more depression because you're feeling you're not doing the best for your child. what I would say is, if you are having these symptoms for more than, because obviously your hormones are still in play for a while. So if you're not breastfeeding up until 6 months and you're still having this feeling of depression, then I would advise you to go to your doctor. I would also advise that you seek a counselor, because these are things that could be talked through as well. Because your feeling of unworthiness is stemming from somewhere, or it is that you're feeling that you can't cope. This is too much for me. I can't manage. It could be that your circumstances has changed during your pregnancy. Maybe you had a partner before you got pregnant, and then during the pregnancy is not there. And so those things are going to affect you. And so what I would advise you is that you seek help, like within, I would say, 6 months after you've had the baby, if you're not breastfeeding. It can go on for longer if you're breastfeeding because your hormones are still at play. But if you're at all worried, speak to your social worker. Social worker, I say.
I think it's an issue that so many women suffer from, and they don't even realise. So we just had to briefly touch on that issue. Mental illness is not a weakness; it's an illness, and I think that's the issue that we need to really kind of grasp. That mental illness is not a weakness; it's not emasculating. It's not something where people have to feel that they're less than. It's actually a weakness that can be managed and and cured, as you said, in some ways, and they can live a totally normal life. Doesn't matter how much of an abyss they feel, because I know when I suffer from it, you felt as if there was a weight on your shoulders every single day. You feel this weight, and you feel you're carrying this weight, and you go to bed with the weight, and you wake up, and as soon as you wake up, you feel this weight. But for anybody listening, that weight can be lifted, but you have to take, step out, and seek help. And we're going to come back in a moment. I'm going to bring you and Patrick on, and we're just going to leave the audience with just some quick fire tips on how to command. So I'll be back to speak to you in just a moment. A very what can I say? The issue of depression is not something that we could deal with in one show. I think we will definitely come back and deal with it again, but it's definitely a serious and relevant issue. My story, as I said to you, is one of feeling incredibly low, feeling incredibly emotional at times, and just pure hopelessness. But the irony of it is, I found my respite as well through going to the gym. That really helped. And I'm going to speak to Shireen and Patrick about that in a moment. And some people they find they seek kind of behaviours that are not the norm. Depression is something that can be managed. It is something that can be cured. Anxiety is something that can be managed, and something that can be cured. And I know, and it's especially helpful when you have someone in your life that is understanding, that can be quite empathetic about your journey. Because if they don't understand what you're going through, they're not going to understand your moods. They're just going to think you're being a horrible person, not understand this is a mental illness. And I hope, if anything, the conversations that we're having today is allowed people to understand some of the signs that they may have recognized in their sister, in their brother, in their partner, in their friend, and think, oh, well, maybe, they just haven't turned into this horrible person. Maybe it might be the period of their life, the isolation, the lockdown, the financial issues that have made them feel the way they have. But we're going to bring Patrick and Serene back in a moment. I just want to tell you what's happening later on inside the week. On a Wednesday, I hold something called Lean Bites Live. This is all about the Lean Mind Body method. Last week we spoke about what did we speak? Oh, why we get fat. That's what we spoke about last week. It was a great show, had some great feedback, and I just led people through the reasons why they get put on weight. This week we're going to talk about sleep. And does sleep affect weight loss? Well, I'm going to show you the science which says sleep affects weight loss. But I'm also going to talk about how sleep affects your mood, how it affects, which will tie in with today, and also how it affects your appetite. So it's Lean Bites Live, 7 p.m. on Wednesday, the 14th of October. You can visit the leanmindbodycoach.com. That's my website. You can submit questions there to be answered during the show. So if you have a question about sleep that you'd like answered on the show, just visit my website and go to Lean Bites Live, and you can ask a question. That's happening this Wednesday. That's every single Wednesday. For the brothers, for the men in the room, I'm holding a program called The Brotherhood, the way of a leaner, healthier, and fitter man. Excuse me, ladies, this is just for the men. I held a group program back recently, and it was mostly women. Great, but we know the brothers need to really come together and talk some real men talk. This is going to be run from the 16th of November to the December the 21st. It's a 5-week group coaching program for men only. It's only for the serious men out there. The men are really serious about improving their health and well-being. And we're going to be touching on so many issues. I'll be releasing details of this next week so people can sign up if they want to. It's going to be an absolutely awesome session. Any man that joins that will really benefit that holistically in so many ways. So we have the Lean Bites Live on Wednesday and the Brotherhood program, which I'll be launching next week. And we'll be back here next week for the podcast live. And if you want to obtain my book, which is the Lean Mind Body Method, it documents my journey of me losing 50 pounds, and it talks about the Lean Mind Body Method, the 4 areas of it. You can go to my website, which you can see there, and you can purchase that book if you wanted to find out more about the Lean Mind Body Method and the book. But for now, let me just try and use technology here to, first of all, bring back Shireen here, and then bring back, let me help some. I've got that right. Yes, I brought back Patrick. Patrick, do you want to take your mic off mute? So the 3 of you are here now, because I know you're muted. Yeah? Let me take you off there. Let me take you off here.
I'm back.
Serene. Oh, you're back. Great. Fantastic. All right. So look, one thing we didn't talk about, and let me go to Patrick first, was exercise. Did exercise play a role in you managing your anxiety or depression, Patrick?
I couldn't exercise. I had chronic fatigue.
Oh, so you had fatigue throughout the time?
Yeah, and it would be worse if I exercised.
Okay, that's interesting. Shireen, what your thoughts on that?
He did mention that he did yoga, and that's a form of exercise as well. And that is brilliant when you are unable to do an aerobic workout, for example. In fact, doing yoga 6 times a week is actually very good when it comes to providing the levels of hormones that you need, the happiness hormones that you need.
Yoga's fantastic. And for anybody watching who's been affected by the issues in this, you can see at the bottom of the screen, I've put 2 organizations, Samaritans. You can call them 24/7. It's a 24/7 hotline. On that number, it's a free call, or if you're suffering from anxiety, please call Anxiety UK on the number there. They're only open between 9:30 and 5:30. It should say 5:30 p.m. there. But call these numbers if you want some help. If you haven't got anybody to talk to. The Samaritans are great. just reach out for them if the issues on this show have affected you in any way. So, Shireen, to anybody who has been watching this show, or maybe watching the recording of the show, and they feel they want to reach out to someone, they feel they want to speak to someone, what would you say to those people now? And they want to come out, they want to admit that, I'm feeling this way. What would you say to that individual who feels now, I'm ready now to speak and share the way I'm feeling?
I would say try speaking to a trusted friend, somebody who you feel you can express yourself freely with. If not, do speak to the Samaritans. I think that is a very good helpline to display, because there is someone on the other end of the phone who doesn't know who you are, but they can help you navigate yourself around the way that you're feeling. Or see a counselor, see your GP. Those are the tips that I would give.
And Patrick, just to come back to what one of the guests asked, the book Dare, where can they get that book Dare from?
Yeah, it's DARE, and they can just get it on audible.com as an ebook, as an audiobook, or on Amazon. And it's by Barry McDonagh. It's absolutely amazing. So, it's a very counterintuitive method for getting over panic attacks and anxiety. But it's been absolutely amazing for me.
Okay, that's fantastic. So sounds like a great book. I'll come back to you in a minute. So Patrick, for you as a man who's been suffering, who suffered from depression, who's now managing their anxiety, what would you say to any men, specifically men, listening to this show now? What would you say to them who may recognize some of the feelings?
Sure. Well, don't hide it. Go out there and get some help. If you've tried without being able to do something yourself, then reach out for help. It's stupid not to. I don't know how to say it more directly. It's just stupid. Like any other problem, if you've been sitting with a problem for a long time, whether it's anxiety or depression, or it's completely different, if you keep on sitting with it with yourself and it's not working, well, then it's not working. Right? It's like, do something different.
Yeah. And there is
Go
light.
there. Ask for help.
There is light at the other end of the tunnel.
You have no idea how bad my situation was. Again, like an anxiety attack every 8 seconds, 8,000 a day. Health was completely shot. Could practically not eat anything. I could hardly walk up stairs. I was so weak, brain fog, so bad that many times when I went to a business meeting, sometimes I was afraid that I was going to be in the middle of a sentence and not being able to say it, because sometimes, some days, I could hardly talk because my brain fog was so bad. So imagine you being in business and getting to a meeting and not knowing whether you can actually utter any coherent sentences. It was really, 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 really bad, both mentally and physically. So if I can get out of that, then I believe that anybody can.
Yeah. And I know, Shireen, you've done...
Literally yesterday I bought running shoes, which I just received here a couple hours ago. And this is like, for me, it's even amazing that I get to that stage where I now feel so strong physically that I can actually go out and do running. So I'm super psyched about that. So I'm truly on the mend here.
Fantastic. It's great to hear. And Shireen, I know you've done some research on men. And what has your research shown as some of the reasons, or possibly the main reason why men just don't want to open up?
Well, obviously they're told that they're weak. They're supposed to be the strong ones, and as a result of that, it does make them feel emasculated as a result of it. But also, Black men in particular has to navigate themselves around the ancestral baggage that they have to deal with. And so they feel as though services are not people that they can trust. They feel the confidentiality won't be there. They feel their therapists don't look like them. And and sometimes they actually don't know what the triggers are, what are the things that they need to look out for to know I am not in a good place. And so as a result of that, they wait until they're in crisis and then they end up in the hospitals. We see them a large proportion in our crisis wards, but not enough in therapy. And there's so many different forms of therapy. There's not just one set. For example, I teach mindfulness as well. So for me, meditation is one aspect of it, but also there are different ones, such as, person-centered, CBT. There are different forms of therapy that you can ask for.
Great. You've mentioned yoga and mindfulness often, so I really want to point that out to anybody listening. These are things that you can take up tomorrow, or you can take up mindfulness today. You can go onto the internet and you can download, or on your phone, you can download a mindfulness app. So these are things you could take control of right now, without waiting yourself. Before I come back to Patrick, let's just a word from you, Serene, about, because so many people are working from home now and they're not in the office, so they're not having that social interaction. And these individuals may not even have a large friends network. So their biggest social interaction was at work. What would you say to those individuals now who find themselves working from home every single day and they're not getting that social interaction that they would normally get in work, and about them being able to manage their work day or even day? What would you say to those individuals working at home in the moment?
I would say think of the 5 ways to well-being. Connect with someone, not just sending a text, but make a phone call, do Skype, do Zoom. You can connect with someone who you're close with. Exercise. That could mean going for a walk. Sometimes it's difficult for somebody who is depressed, for example, to think about doing a 1-hour workout. Start with 10 minutes, because that way you can build it up. If you feel that way, give, help your neighbor, do some shopping for them. That is another way for you to actually feel some satisfaction within yourself, and do something that teaches you something. So keep learning.
Yes.
The more you learn about something that you're interested in, the more you will feel good about yourself. So I would give the tip of the 5 well-being. Yeah,
That's great. And also I would add, if they are feeling that way, they should definitely consult with their HR department or whatever department in their company. Don't feel, I know some people, I work in a corporate environment sometimes, and some people feel a little bit of trepidation when it comes to informing their workplace that they're suffering from stress or suffering from anxiety, because they feel it will make them vulnerable in the company. But I think that's the wrong way to look at it, because nowadays I think that so many more workplaces have things in place to support you, especially now, this working from home. So they shouldn't be afraid to speak to their support department at work and allow them to understand how they're feeling. Would you echo that?
I would definitely echo that, because even the HR departments can refer them to see a counselor. But one of the things I will say as well is they need to set some boundaries around themselves. So you're working from home, but switch off when it's time to switch off. Use your lunch hour. Use it to go for a walk instead of doing extra work. Set some boundaries around yourself. Learn to say no as well.
Yeah, great. And I've got someone here saying the topic is very close to their heart. Happy to talk and listen to anybody. And it's great when people offer to hear someone a story. Patrick, your journey. I have a program which I run called the Best Worst Experience, and it seems contrary, because sometimes you can take a terrible experience and you can learn so much from it that can help you, not just help yourself, but help others. So we're not diminishing depression, but there are times when we can look back and introspect and think, well, okay, this is where I was, but that journey has now given me an empathy. It's given me a form of knowledge which I can now use to help other people. If I was to ask you in closing this part, what that might have been for you, if you have recognized it, what would you say?
Well, first of all, to really understand my own mind, because I had to go very, very deep in myself and explore all kinds of ways to get over this. You know, for me,
Mm,
there was nothing that I wasn't willing to try. So I've got an incredible understanding of myself and in general how the mind works. I thought I knew the mind fairly well before that because I actually my first business in very, very young age of 21 was actually as a psychotherapist.
mhm,
So I thought I knew everything about the mind. Turned out I didn't. So it's given me a much, much deeper understanding of the mind in general, myself specifically, but also I would say I'm more empathetic to people going through all kinds of problems,
mm.
not just mental health problems, but problems in general. I'm more understanding of people.
That's great, because that's what a journey. And Shireen, I think in this time, I think, I think we've had someone just come out and said, look, she's willing to listen to anybody. I think in this time, it's our duty as well, I would say, to check on, our neighbours, on people who we feel may be a little bit vulnerable, just to check in and see how they are without necessarily intruding. What would you say about that?
Definitely. I mean, we need to looking after someone's needs help us to feel better as well. Funny enough, it's good for your mental health.
Yeah.
I would say, if it's a situation where you feel you're a bit stuck, then use a daily to-do list so
Hmm.
that at least, even if it's something as small as getting up to take a shower, if you're depressed, at least it's something you can tick off your list. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Don't pull all-nighters. That would be another thing that I would say.
Yeah.
Try to avoid all-nighters, stay away from caffeine at night, keep a notebook, write
Mm.
down your feelings so you know how you're feeling, and what's some of the things that are triggering you, and stay away from negative people.
Uh,
Drink
uh,
lots of
yes,
water.
I think that negative people is something we should stay away with all the time. It just in coming to an end in this comedy. I mean, when I was studying CBT, laughter was seen as a great therapy. Um,
Mhm.
Patrick, did you use any kind of forms of watching a funny film, or trying to put yourself in situations that would make you laugh or feel happy? Did you use that on your journey?
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. Lots of stand-up comedy, which I loved anyway. But that was, yeah, that was a good thing for me for sure.
And Shireen, what would you say about using comedy as a way of some form of self therapy or humor?
Definitely. Laughter is a great way. It actually helps with
Yeah,
the endorphins in your body.
absolutely. Yes,
So that,
absolutely. So, Patrick, really appreciate your, again, I have to say, because it's not easy to come on to a show and be as open and as vulnerable as you are. Um, but the great thing is, I'm sure your story would have helped some people, and I really want to thank you for that, and I want to appreciate that you coming on and being so candid and being so open with us, because I know that must have taken it. I really
You're
do
welcome.
appreciate that. So if people
Yeah,
wanted
I
to,
feel
because you
it's my duty.
absolutely, now you have a skill set. I know you definitely have a skill set when it comes to marketing and people. If people wanted to reach out to you to possibly take advantage of some of the skill sets you have, I know you're on LinkedIn or whatever, where could they reach you, Patrick?
Preferably either Facebook and just go to facebook.com/Patrick Empowers, LinkedIn, same
Okay.
name. or to go to my website, patrickempowers.com, where they can get my new book
Okay.
and for
Tell us
free.
about your
For
tell us about
free.
your book. Tell us about very briefly about your book, Patrick.
Oh, very briefly. Okay, it's called, well, the new one they can get for free is called 50 Fast and Furious Networking Tips.
Okay.
So it's obviously about how to network, how to create
Okay.
connections, how to influence
Great.
people. The other one is you could get a sample of the other one's called New Marketing Manifesto. That's a much
Okay.
longer book, more in depth about what's going on in marketing and the new rules in marketing.
Great. Fantastic. So Patrick empowers. Great. So Shireen,
Come.
thank you very, very much for sharing your wonderful expertise with us. It's been enlightening for me, and I'm sure it's been enlightening for the individuals who have been watching. If people wanted to reach out to you, where can they find you, Shireen?
They can find me on LinkedIn or shireen.barrows@gmail.com. My website has been built as we speak, but if you need to reach out to me, I'm also on Facebook as well.
Is that a business page or is that a personal page?
If it's for business, then you can reach me on LinkedIn. That's the best way to get me at the moment, or my email address, which is shireen.barrows@gmail.com.
Okay, and there will be a link to you, Patrick, and there will be a link to you, Shireen, on the leanmindbodycoach.com website. So people, if they can't remember, they can just go there and they can contact you. Again, thank you very, very much for the participation in the show. And yeah, I think we could only touch on so much. It's such a vast issue here, but hopefully what we've touched on has resonated with some people, and more importantly, it's helped some people to be able to reflect on their conditions. So let me just say goodbye for now. I know I'm going to come and speak to you both in a minute. Let me say goodbye for now to both of you. So guys, that was a session there. That really was. Yeah, it was definitely a session. For me, it was one that kind of really resonated with me. It really, really resonated with me. Let me just put up the helpline numbers there again. If the issues in the show affected you in any way, reach out to Samaritans, reach out to Anxiety UK. They can offer you some assistance as someone who suffered from depression incredibly badly. I mean, I'm not talking about my story here, but it was deep. And it was about 12 years ago. I can tell you that there is a way out, but you have to speak about it. You have to willing to be open and vulnerable and let people help you. Yeah, there is nothing strong about keeping it to yourself, because as a man, you're not as effective as you should be. As a woman, you're not going to be as effective as you should be. There's nothing wrong in talking, reaching out for somebody else's hand, and often these people are waiting for you to make the first move. But I think Shireen gave us some great tips. If you are a husband, a wife, a friend, and you have an individual who you suspect you've seen their mood change over the last few months, but it could be a long time. You could have been living with someone with depression for a long time and you just don't know how to deal with it or how to approach it. I think Shireen gave us some great tips there in what we can do. Remember the yoga, that was fantastic. Yoga is a fantastic way to be able to manage your mind, stress and worry. And the mindfulness, there are so many apps that you can use now that can help with mindfulness. And if you're suffering from the symptoms for 2 to 3 weeks and you have this feeling of hopelessness, this feeling that life is so heavy and it just won't go away, then that may be time for you to be able to seek some professional help. And if it is a situation where you can't go by yourself, then again, reach out to someone, and I'm sure you'll find someone who's willing to go with you. You'll find that people are incredibly supportive, and we're in a time, this coronavirus time, when it's unpredictable. Things are changing at such a fast pace, and the one thing we really have to manage is our mental capacity during this time. This is outside of even being depressed or anxious. We have to do what we can to keep ourselves sane, because this madness is something that can drive us crazy. And we want to be here in full working order for the year 21 and the year 22. So thank you very, very much to my two guests. Next week, we'll be back here again. I think the issue is going to be about a man's issue about prostate cancer. We're going to be dealing with that next week. So the same time, 7 o'clock next week. We went a little bit longer than normal because this issue is such an issue that I didn't think could be dealt with in an hour. So I really appreciate everybody who's joining us each week. I appreciate you guys taking your time out, the ones that have made the comments today for the issue. It will be on Facebook, share it, and just reach out and touch someone's hand. And if you're someone who's feeling anxious or feeling depressed or low in time, realize it's not a weakness, it's an illness that can be dealt with the right kind of method. So what I have to say is, the name of the show, the best habit you could do is to make health your habit. And that's mental and physical health. Good night. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and I will see you at the same time next week on Make Health Your Habit podcast live. Good night.